Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you all here. This is really quite a well-established series of Friday afternoon entertainments now. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to it. My name is Peter Collins. I'm Director of Science Policy here at the Royal Society, and our work in history of science is one of the things that comes with that assignment. Okay, with that then, it's my enormous pleasure to introduce Graeme. Gooday, our speaker for today. We've worked together for a long time, intermittently, on bodies like the British Society of History of Science, and indeed Leeds also is part of my repertoire. Graeme is a professor, is a newly minted professor, which is great news, of History of Science and Technology at Leeds, and he's also the Director of Learning and Teaching in the Leeds Department of Philosophy. And I think it's really marvellous that he's won acclaim not just for research, well, that's easy, anybody can do that, but also for teaching, which is a much more rare distinction. And that combination betrays someone who is clearly in love with his subject, and we'll see why in a moment. Like all good speakers on Fridays, he has a book coming out called Domesticating Electricity, which turns out to be the subject of our talk today. You'll have to wait a bit. I think it's not due until about the end of the year, but it has been accepted for publication, so you better finish writing it, I think, is the answer to that. So, Graeme Gooday.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope I can be heard at the back. Indeed, my title today is Domesticating Electricity. And I want to start by emphasizing this particular phrase is to be understood in two ways. Firstly, the idea that electricity was brought into the home in the late part of the 19th century, but in the process, it actually had to be tamed, domesticated like a pet, to be conducive to orderly household behavior. Those two themes are interconnected. And this I find a particularly fascinating topic, and I hope you'll find it fascinating too, because quite a number of problems were encountered in this twofold domestication of electricity, problems that actually interest the historian, and indeed, interestingly, have not been covered much by historians before. One question that comes up again and again if one looks at this period is the question, what is electricity? There are many possible answers to this question, but what came out of the manifold answers was the notion that it was uncertain what it was. It was invisible and intangible, and it wasn't at all obvious to many individuals why they should trust such a stranger in their home whose credentials were not established yet, by no means as easily understood as gas that could be subject to the chemical analysis of the laboratory. So there's the issue there of letting a stranger into the home. There are new ways of being killed and injured, okay, which are prompted by the arrival of electricity in the home. Shocks, which one can't get from gas, possibly even death, and we'll see one or two unfortunate fatalities in today's talk, but there's a low death count, so don't worry too much. So the issue here is of establishing how this new arrival in the home could be made safe for the ordinary consumer, particularly for the family. Also, early on, electric lighting was remarkably unreliable, and questions arose about why one should bother giving it up, why one should actually bother giving up the gas light and take into one's home something much less reliable. It's also clear from contemporary accounts that electric lighting was extremely expensive. It really was a luxury item. That might sound a rather curious notion now, but it was for luxury consumption, such as cars were, of course, in the first decade. And then we'll see that the most important problem for some was the matter of the appearance of electric light. It was thought by some, especially, but not only women, to be rather garish, ugly, and unpleasant to look at. Okay, and in relation to that, what I'll do to actually distill what is otherwise a 100,000-word book into half an hour is to focus on the role of certain key women in the domestication of electricity. Jenny, Lady Churchill, and Mrs. Alice Gordon. Okay. So, the arrival of electric light in London took place, obviously, over various decades of the 19th century, but we find that we have arc lighting available for the first time commercially in the 1870s. Now, those of you who've known arc lighting in your careers, you know it's very dazzling and bright. And it actually arrived on the scene at around about the same time as there were discussions about the possible impact of the Swan and Edison lamps that appeared almost simultaneously in 1878. But actually, although they were patented in that era, in that year, they were by no means ready for public consumption. In fact, they weren't available for regular usage until 1880, 81, largely because they simply weren't reliable at all outside the lab. So arc lighting fills the void of expectation created by Edison and Swan, and is largely presented as an outdoor phenomenon. You can see here, is visible to you at the back, images of London in 1881, April. This is an image from the graphic showing how night is almost turned to day by the process of illuminating. You can see there, if I go around anti-clockwise, the brush light on the Thames embankment, just here. Then next to that is on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral. Then we have the Mansion House, Guildhall, and then finally London Bridge. Now, for most people, arc light was certainly dazzling. Some absolutely loathed it. And here's a wonderful poem, which some of you may have seen, Lines to the Electric Light at the Great Western Railway Terminus from the St James Gazette of 1888, and not by a fan. Twinkle, twinkle, little arc, sickly blue, uncertain spark, up above my head you swing, ugly, strange, expensive thing. Now the flaring gas is gone from the realms of Paddington. You must show your quivering light, twinkle, blinkle, left and right. Cold, unlovely, blinding star, I've no notion what you are, how your wondrous system works, who controls its jumps and jerks. Though your light perchance surpass homely oil or vulgar gas, still, I close with this remark, I detest you, little arc. Okay, so what we see there is a clear vision that electric light in the arc form was really deeply appalling to the residents of Paddington. Now, what we know from this actually is that one character involved is that he was James Edward Gordon. He installed the lighting system there. His spouse, Alice Gordon, then had to work very hard to persuade women, I think particularly, to actually reverse this view of arc lighting and of incandescent lighting. And the problem was, I think, that incandescent lighting acquired initially some of the reputation of arc light's ugliness. Many of the people who actually saw incandescent light for the first time were expecting it to be as harsh as arc lighting and responded with similar revulsion. Now, not everyone actually felt deterred at this revulsion at arc lighting. Lord Salisbury isn't a figure that often comes up in history of science, but he was a fellow of the Royal Society and indeed conducted many electrical experiments in his home in the very grandiose Hatfield House. Some of you may have seen this place. And he not only introduced electric bells and the telephone into his home just out of office in 1880, but also he tried introducing arc lighting into the dining room. And his daughter recalls how unimpressed the women of the house were. She relates to this, actually. This is Lady Gwendolen Cecil from a 5-volume magisterial biography of her father. For a brief period, she says, Salisbury's family and guests were compelled to eat their dinners under the vibrating glare of one of these arc lights in the center of the dining hall ceiling. No exertion of goodwill or courtesy by him, though, could silence the plaintive protests of his lady visitors, and he would gird with growing despondency at the obstructions which feminine vanity offered to the conquests of science. The clear point being there that he found it rather entertaining to pursue this opportunity to experiment on electric lighting. But actually the sheer noise of arc lighting was almost impossible to talk under. That was a problem. So fortunately, he discovered soon after that the Swan incandescent light and used that instead very quickly. But that didn't end his problems. One of the things I've spent some time researching is a death that took place on the Hatfield House estate in mid-December 1881. and even featured in the Times newspaper. And this was the death of a labourer who actually had been helping to install a telephone wire to link together the generating station on the River Lee, which powered the lights in Lord Salisbury's home. And the coverage of this actually was, I think, largely driven by press interest in Lord Salisbury as a politician, but also because this was the first time anyone had been seriously injured and indeed killed by a domestic installation of electric lighting. And the prospects of electric lighting becoming universal in the home, I think, brought a particular piquancy to the risk hereby revealed. It's not often that manual labourers get reported in the Times for their death, except by most unusual, grisly means, and this is one example of that. But this was widely discussed across the press. A whole chapter of my book is entitled The Many Deaths of Lord Salisbury's Gardner, because it's interpreted in many ways, often mistakenly in terms of him being a gardener. The death is transmuted by Chinese whispers to become that of a chambermaid as well in London, eventually. What you find then is that this episode is so widely publicised, it's something of a disaster for electrical promoters who really see this as setting up all the wrong expectations about the supposed safety of electric lighting. So one of the moves that's made is to make electrical lighting a glamorous luxury enterprise that will be desirable for many. And one of the major agents in this transformation was Lady Randolph Churchill, the American heiress. And as you can tell by a family resemblance, Winston Churchill's mother. Now, she recalls in her autobiography that hers was the first private house in London to have electric lights. There are quite a number of houses for which that claim is made, so I should be a little bit sceptical about that. But they were given a free installation by the Crompton Company based in Chelmsford, realising that the best way of publicising electric lighting was to give it to the glamorous political elite of London, and the Churchills were certainly at the centre of the Conservative Party elite in those days. They had a house in Marble Arch, and they had a small dynamo installed in a cellar underneath the street, and it's apparently greatly excited all the horses as they approached the door. The light was such an innovation, she says, that it evinced much curiosity and interest, and people actually knocked on the door asking to see the light they had installed in the dining room. So this was a good move by the Crompton Company to try to glamorise electric lighting. But it didn't all work out very neatly. She continues that there was one particular fiasco she recalls when she and Randolph Churchill were showing it off. But the light went out all of a sudden in the middle of the feast, just as they were expatiating on its beauties. Most unfortunate. And the guests had to remain in utter darkness until the oil lamps and candles, which had been relegated to the lower regions, were unearthed and sent upstairs. And this was not an uncommon occurrence. Crompton himself recalls one instance when a ball for young ladies and gentlemen actually was plunged into darkness, causing much concern for the morals actually of those concerned. And indeed, this was a problem most especially for alternate current lighting that was most difficult to manage, which led many to actually abandon AC schemes and go back to having either DC electricity actually or even gas light. So Lady Churchill says that the electric light did not prove to us in her household to be an unmitigated blessing. Worse than that, because Randolph Churchill was so impressed by it, he spoke on behalf of the electric lighting interest in Parliament. He was then obliged to pay up for the free installation he had, and indeed paid double the going price. So a bit of an unlucky calculation there about the benefits of free installations. And one other important means of glamorising electric lighting was to actually use electric jewellery. This may be an unfamiliar notion. I don't know how many of you have ever wanted to have electric lights adorning your body. But this was quite a craze from about 1881 to 1901. And you can see here both ballet dancers and ladies of the ballroom were actually indulging in these. Now you can see at the top left-hand corner of the picture there the sort of battery cell that might have been used actually put underneath the ballet dancer's tutu. Okay, some of these were primary batteries with lead and acid in, others were secondary batteries. And you can see there the ballet dancer able to move quite freely without actually getting any electric shock, not dying of electric shock at all. And similarly, the lady here actually has electric jewellery in her hair, looking particularly glamorous accordingly. But not all so simple, shall we say. Certainly, the point to be made here is that a number of theatrical performers, almost all women, had actually died very unpleasant deaths on stage in the 19th century through catching their dresses on gas flares and paraffin lamps. Really quite gruesome. You're burnt alive on stage. And the point here to be made is tacitly that you can actually have electric lighting touching your body and you don't die. This is a very powerful means, rhetorically, of showing how safe electricity actually is, okay? Particularly with the supposedly vulnerable female body involved as well. Mrs. Gordon talks about this in her book, Decorative Electricity. I shall explain quite what that concept involves at the end of this paper, but this book was one written with J.E.H. Gordon, the man who installed the much maligned electric arc lighting at the Great Western Railway Station. And she recalls from the early 1880s that she used to do a lot of this sort of thing herself, although the usage of having, well, the usage of electric fairy lights, as they're going to be known, came to be rather vulgar. One of the means of vulgarization, I should explain, was the use of them in Iolanthe, if you've seen that particular operetta. In 1883, in various different versions of the operetta, a large number of fairies appear, actually all adorned with electric lighting. That's where I think we get the phrase fairy light from now, which adorns, of course, our Christmas trees. Okay, now you know. Okay. So she says herself that these kinds of fairy lights gave much amusement, but also tribulation. I've not found any evidence thus far of ballet dancers suffering from them, but certainly she did. And this little anecdote from her book on the use of electric lights in the bedroom and ballroom explains why she came to abandon electric jewelry. She says, in those days, the 1880s, batteries were difficult to manage. Once she found a case of a battery, and the light was set on the floor, and the ashes burnt a hole in the carpet. Okay. On other occasions, the battery would heat up and leak. And she recalls one occasion when she replaced the resistance element in a battery with a slightly inappropriate rating. And this heated, the battery gave way, and she threw it into the bath, at which point the acid poured out, taking off all the paint. So she says, having spoilt a dress, a carpet, and a bath, I abandoned personal electric light decorations. So there you see the hazards of trying to show the safety of electricity in the home. A little ironic, I hope you agree. Okay. Now, if I can move on to the next. The key thing to bear in mind here is it's not just women at the upper echelons of society that had to be persuaded of electric lighting being safe. Servants, too, were among those who needed to be persuaded that they could actually handle it with safety. What I've learned from my researches is that it was often female servants who'd been customarily employed to trim the wicks of paraffin and gas lamps and candles were also expected to handle the electric lights, which led to all sorts of complications. They were the ones who were most prone to hearing the alarming rumours, such as that about Lord Salisbury's supposed Gardner. And they were long, it seems, reluctant to use it. As late as 1931, Dame Caroline Hazlitt of the Electrical Association for Women reported that fear of electricity among female staff was so widespread that some of our larger houses, meaning aristocratic landed seats, do not adopt electrical methods. So short was the supply of servants that they could actually effectively refuse to have electric lighting in their homes. And this actually has a little family ring for me, if you don't mind me being a little bit autobiographical. My great-great-aunt, Emily Thomason, my mother tells me, actually avoided all gadgets of electrical sorts until her death in the 1950s. Famous phrase, I can't do the Essex accent, but it was something like, don't touch that, their electricity is dangerous, it is. Okay. So a whole generation of people, perhaps mostly women, born in the 1880s, dying in the mid-20th century, actually felt just that way, which explains why it took so long for electricity to arrive. And it's noticeable just at this time that gas lighting finally disappears and electric lighting becomes quite universal. It's not just, I think, the arrival of the national grid, but the disappearance of the fear of electric lighting as well from those who'd grown up with the alarming rumours about it. Okay. Now, the next thing to emphasise is that it wasn't just fear of the possible dangers of electric lighting, whether justified or not, that was in the public domain in discussion of the domestication of electricity. There was the glaring character of its appearance. Okay, and this is a little extract from a piece in Punch, responding to the use of electrical lighting at a horticultural exhibition in London in July 1882. And I should read it out to you. This is from supposedly A Lady on Electric Light, although clearly written by one of the male authors of Punch, in a somewhat satirical mode. "O cruel electricity that gives so strong a light, in many an unprotected lamp you flash supremely bright." I'm cutting a bit out. "This lamp malign of Edison's is worse than brightest day. A veil, I should say, may serve to screen from sun, but when in evening dress, there's nothing twixt these awful lamps and female loveliness. Then, men of science, you must aid and tell us, if you please, how we shall make our charms withstand such glaring lights as these. For if the ladies find these lamps still turn them pale and wan, they'll lead a feminine crusade against Edison and Swan." And this is just, of course, what they did, in fact. Okay. Now, you see here, for example, how common it was in the early years to have electric lighting unshaded. This is a view of Cragside. You may know this. Cragside is where one sees the home of Lord Armstrong, Sir William Armstrong as he was then, a great arms manufacturer and supporter of Joseph Swan. I think underrated much of the early production of Joseph Swan's light bulbs. And you've got Cragside here depicted in another illustration from the Graphic newspaper. And here you see the classic, I think, circular glass bulbs there. And with Lord Armstrong taking major place in all of these pictures, with I think Lady Armstrong just next to him, and one on the top right there. But unshaded, showing the full luminescence, and also being quite clinical in revealing every aspect of the room's decor. Those of you who have ever seen gas lighting will know this does not happen with gas lighting. Gas lighting leaves lots of shadows and lots of dark places, and doesn't quite reveal one's aging, I think, as Mrs. Gordon herself was keen to emphasize. Now, certainly, if you look at the literature produced by the electrical industry, it's evident that they, on the whole, perhaps mostly run by men, wanted to emphasize one does not need any shading of electric light. I think largely because of the fact that any shading on electric light, of course, decreased its luminescence and thereby decreased its apparent efficiency as a means of turning money into light. This is from a little booklet produced by the Anglo-American Brush Corporation, which is the British branch of an American company. And this was the same company, of course, that ran the electric lighting system for Lord Salisbury's home in Hatfield House. And in their promotional leaflet called The Electric Light Brought Home to Us from 1885, they say, "Brightness. The incandescent light is white, soft and brilliant, but not necessarily dazzling," the clear contrast being made there, of course, with the arc light that was. And as for beauty, it says, "An incandescent lamp, being in itself a beautiful object, requires no external decoration." But we shall see that was by no means what everyone thought about it. And I have for you a quotation. This is from the IET archives, so thank you for the IET for allowing me access to this one. So William and Lady Thompson had their encounter with electric lighting in 1882. I think Sir William Thompson was competing with William Preece, the chief electrician of the post office, to see who could actually have the home electrified and lit up first by the Edison and or Swan systems. And clearly, both Lady Thompson and Sir William discussed this in detail. He, of course, later on was Lord Kelvin, but not yet. And he writes to Preece saying that he had tried the new Swan and Edison lights in the dining room, and I got much admiration from friends for the brilliance. But the high incandescence, he said, the brightness required for good economy is too dazzling, he says, and will be injurious to the eyes if unmitigated. And there's much discussion in the press at this time about the possible harm to eyesight from electric light. Okay, there wouldn't, of course, be from gas light. And it's interesting to note then that he's found, by discussion with his spouse, that the thing to do is to have fine silk paper lampshades made into a little globe to hang around these bulbs, and that makes them bearable to look at. And Lady Thompson is busy making these up, actually, for their 112 electric lights. No matter there for economy, I think. Yellow and green, blue and grey, which all look very pretty when lighted at night. okay, despite the loss of efficiency and brightness. Okay, so it isn't just obviously women who are concerned about the glaring effect of light. But Mrs. Gordon, 9 years later, when writing her book Decorative Electricity, finds it's still a major problem, and she launches the enterprise of decorative electricity in order to overcome the opposition that she's found amongst many women who say, and she reports there, most of the electric light found at present in dining rooms is very glaring and disagreeable, and fully justifies the remark I so often hear made by ladies, I never will have the electric light in my house as it gives me a headache whenever I dine by it. And Mrs. Gordon is unsurprised by this, given her experience of the kinds of illumination she's seen at dinner parties in recent months. She talks about a round table with 10 guests and 10 lamps with lemon yellow shades, all hung just above the eyes of the diners. So the light was focused into their eyes, as she says there, like a horrid detective little bullseye, showing up every wrinkle and line in the face. A delicate matter for those of a certain generation. And what she then does is to explain how to deal with this. But just to give you an example of the kind of illumination that it is problematic, this is an illustration from Lightning, a popular and business journal of electric lighting, just launched in 1891 to promote the business. And you see here two examples of how things could go wrong. You see in the larger picture, there's a man seated alone onto his wonderfully glaring new electric light fitting, and a woman sitting in darkness in the corner. Okay, no comment is made about that in the text, but it's clear that she's not very keen about being seen underneath this light. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see an example of how one can really dazzle and appall diners, in fact, by having lights shining directly into their eyes from a dining room fitting. If you look carefully, you'll see the men are looking rather more enthusiastic than the women there about this experience. So what Mrs. Gordon proposes is a scheme for decorating lamps, either by ladies' own skills in sewing and using silk, or by purchasing commodities from shops. What she shows you is a large amount of exotica, much of it actually drawn from Japanese models of how to decorate. Japanese fashion, I think, being quite popular in home decoration in the 1890s. There you see lots of storks being borrowed and cranes. And you see here on the right-hand side one stork figure who's leaning over a writing desk with a lampshade. And rather amusingly, there's a little frog just behind, which the stork is looking forward to eat and is safe and sound behind on the scene. So there's a little humour introduced to these lighting schemes as well. Okay. And finally, here's how to do it properly in the dining room. Have a fully shaded lamp and elegant figurines of Eros and his classical friends to give a sense of something rather more demure than the glaring spectacle you saw earlier. Okay. And this book, Decorative Electricity, went down extremely well. It was widely read. It's clear from the second edition that it was reviewed by engineering journals, national newspapers, ladies' journals, business journals, too. Everyone thought it was actually impressive, apart from those who worked in gaslighting, who were quite condescending about it, unsurprisingly. And the reviews all emphasise that Mrs. Gordon has persuaded them in the art of decorative electricity, that it's possible to make electric lighting not merely functional and a matter of economical lighting, but a form of art in ways that would appeal to many ladies. This is a quotation, as you see, from the ladies' pictorial, emphasising there that Mrs. Gordon could speak with a confidence, i.e. the authority of personal experience, because her home actually had itself in about 200 lights. And this is a review from Queen, the court newspaper, by Charlotte Robinson, who's Queen Victoria's own personal advisor on decorations. And she writes, as many correspondents to Queen, to her column, have recently been seeking practical details as to the installation, switches, fire risks on glow lighting, etc., I'm sure they will welcome the delightful little book Mrs. J.H. Gordon has just published. The artistic possibilities of this illuminant seem almost limitless, and no one can close Mrs. Gordon's fascinating book without being convinced of the beauty, economy, safety, and decorative joys which await the happy owners of houses lighted by electricity. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. So I'm running out of time, so let me conclude. Well, how does one think about the ways in which the disorderly problems of electric light were solved? Well, firstly, in terms of risk, one key factor I showed you was that electric jewellery demonstrates the apparent safety of electric light. One can hold it on one's body without any major consequences, at least in most cases. In terms of being unreliable, I didn't say much about this, but what happens is I think when one moves beyond individual dynamos installed in the basement or the garden and goes to full-scale systems which are centrally located, that brings much more stability and reliability. So gas lighting really has competition on its hands. In terms of expense, well, electric lighting remained relatively expensive, whereas there's been much discussed by economic historians until the middle of the 20th century, by which time one has the national grid. But by glamorizing electric light as a luxury commodity, it made it attractive to those who are seeking some way of decorating their homes in artistic and innovative ways, particularly because clearly the aristocracy were leading on this kind of illumination. It's very interesting that there are many Conservative Party members who have electric lighting in their homes, rather few Liberals who I think preferred gas lighting. There's a whole book to be written there, I think, shall we say. Garishness, I think what I've hinted at is how women were effective at actually making electric light bearable in the home by having discrete lampshades to cover over the otherwise garish experience of the incandescent bulb lit nakedly. But one final thing, what was electricity? Well, that question wasn't really answered fully. There was some discussion about it being basically electrons, although that didn't answer the question fully. The main tactic I've discovered for how to make electricity seem safe, tamed, and domesticated was the personification of it, actually, in friendly images, iconography. And thank you again to the IET here for one of the images you'll now see. Most extreme and possibly a little bit indelicate at this time of day, actually, on the left-hand side there, is the German Edison company's advert from 1888 showing a Valkyrie figure, very lightly clad, it must be said, holding a light above her head. And that's, of course, the classical symbol of truth and/or justice, showing, of course, a clear link between progress, civilization, and electric lighting, one, of course, we'd all agree with. And at her feet, you can see that the powers of lightning are tamed. She has tamed the dangers of this natural force. Slightly more delicate, 3 years later, is from Mrs. Gordon's book, From Faraday and Sons, not the famous Faraday, I should emphasize. He didn't have children, as I recall. A female goddess figure, very much in the Greek mold, holding a light aloft, floating above the Earth's surface. And then, finally, from 1910 or thereabouts, an advertisement for the Mazda electric lamp by the Thompson Houston Company, showing a female figure, very well-clad indeed, actually, showing how even the sun is happy in the background there to have this rival illuminant in the world. All of these, interestingly, of course, are not in domestic settings, but they show how electric light has been tamed and domesticated symbolically, actually, through a female allegory. But let me just leave you with one final moment of deadly humour, and there you have it, actually. Maybe it wasn't fully tamed after all. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?